if you're not feeling well on Shabbat. And our class is really divided into two parts, maybe three. Let's say three parts. The first part is from the Gemara, looking at how the Gemara talks about taking medication, what the problems might be in taking medication. That's the first couple of sources. After we've looked at the Gemara and the commentaries on the Gemara and how they view medication on Shabbat, we're then going to go to the Bet Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch to see how this halacha was codified in the Shulchan Aruch. Now, don't forget that medication at the time of the Gemara 2,000 years ago and medication at the time of the Shulchan Aruch 400 years ago were very different. So we're going to see a big jump from the way that halacha is dealt with in the Gemara to the way that that same halacha is dealt with in the Shulchan Aruch. That's part two. And then the third part, we're going to jump to today, to like the last 100 years, where really medicine hasn't changed. In terms of taking medication, the way we make medicine is not very different from 100 years ago, as opposed to say. And we're going to look at how nowadays we deal with taking medication on Shabbat. And I hope, actually, as opposed to many of our discussions, this will have some practical ramifications, and we can give some very clear guidelines about what medication to take and what medication not to take on Shabbat. I just want to preface with a problem. You all know, everybody knows, pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat, right? Doche every other mitzvah. Saving a life is of paramount importance. So therefore, if God forbid somebody's life is in danger, you always break Shabbat in order to save that person's life. I'm sure I've told at least some of you in the past about a friend of mine who was new to observant Judaism, and he was in a yeshiva on a Friday night, and he had an electric blanket. Do you know what electric blankets are? Do they exist even? Mm-hmm. Do they exist? They still exist. Yes. Like you plug in a blanket, and it's like a radiator that you lie underneath, and it's not made out of metal, or at least maybe. Anyway, so he had this electric blanket, went to sleep Friday night, and the electric blanket caught fire. Oh, no. That's quite dangerous, right? So do you know what you need to do when an electric blanket catches fire on Friday night? Huh? You put it out. You put it out. That's what you do. However, a fire on Shabbat in your bedroom is dangerous. You follow? But this sweet little chap, because he was worried, can you put out a fire on Shabbat? He waited a little bit. As a result, he burnt his legs a little bit. Baruch Hashem, he's absolutely fine. But it's very, very important that in our discussion of taking medication on Shabbat, that we make clear right at the outset that we are not talking about a life-threatening situation. If God forbid someone is in a life-threatening situation, then of course you take medication on Shabbat. We're talking about somebody with a headache or a cold or a cough, or somebody who needs to spend a day or two in bed, and Bezrat Hashem, they'll be fine tomorrow. Can those people have medication on Shabbat? But we're not talking about somebody who's, somebody whose life is in danger. Is that clear to everybody? Joy? So with that preface, we're now going to come into some Gemara. So the first piece of Gemara that we're going to learn is, we're learning from Shabbat, Nun Gimel Amud Bet. In the olden times, at the time of the Gemara, they used to do bloodletting. Do you know about bloodletting? Yes. It was at some stage, I think it was believed to be a way of, removing disease from the body. So the Gemara tells us, Misha achazod dam. So somebody who's, they're bloodletting, there's a little, so you might normally they might at some stage might have put salt or something. I don't know what they would, actually I've got no idea. You might put something on the wound in order to stop the bleeding. So on Shabbat, you don't do that. Ma'amidin on top of mayim, bishvil she'itz tanen. You put it in water in order that it should get cold. Why not? Why not put whatever medication you might normally put on it to stop the bleeding? Why would you not do that? Ama'ula gezeira mishum shechikat samemanin. there is a rabbinic decree about smearing medication, or it's actually. Well, let's look at Rashi. Rashi on that Gemara, source number 2, Gezerah mishum shchikat samanin, b'midi d'rafua gazurabanan. Concerning medication, the rabbis made a decree. De'i sharit shum refuah. If the rabbis would allow people to take medication, ati lemishri shchikat samamin, then people would come to start grinding herbs. You know, in the olden days, you take the mortar and pestle, and you would grind whatever you would grind, and then whatever paste was created, that's your medicine. Now, obviously, there is an isur d'oraita, a biblical prohibition on grinding. Tochen grinding is one of the 39 categories of forbidden activities on Shabbat. So Rashi is explaining that people are not allowed to use medication on Shabbat. Because if I use medication on Shabbat, you'll say, oh no, I've run out of my Acamol, Tylenol, whatever you call it, I've run out of my medication. And then you open the cupboard, there's nothing there. Then I'm quickly going to whip out my mortar and pestle. I'm going to grind a new batch of medication, and I'll transgress an Isur D'Oraita. So the prohibition is not in taking medication, but is if I take medication, I'm then using up medication. And then if I'm using up the medication, I might need more medication later, and I might come to make medication. You follow? That is a beautiful example of a gezerah de rabbanan, a rabbinic fence, like a prohibition. The rabbis are putting a fence around a biblical prohibition in order to protect it. No one's going to grind because they're not going to be taking the medication. So no one's going to run out of medication. So we're going to be fine. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, that's Gemara number 1. Gemara number 2. Not Gemara, the Rif on the Gemara. Rif is very, very interesting. I'll tell you why the Rif is interesting. Rif, that's Rav Yitzchak Alfasi. Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif, is a teacher of a teacher. He taught his student, the Rif student was the Rimigash. The Rimigash was a teacher of somebody called Maimon, and Maimon was a teacher of somebody called the Rambam. So he was a teacher of a teacher of a teacher of the Rambam. Did I get that right? Mm-hmm. So he, yes?
The Maimon in that chain is the father of Rambam?
Yes, because his name is Rav Moshe ben Maimon. Exactly. Now, Rif, as you might know, Rif is somebody who wrote one of the first books of Halakha. And the way that he wrote this first book of Halakha is, he took the Gemara, the Talmud, which is this huge, like a 20-something volumes of Gemara, and he cut out all non-practical Halakha. So he didn't so much write a book of practical Halakha, but he sort of like created one by deleting everything that wasn't practical Halakha, and therefore the work that remains is his practical halakha. So what's interesting, the reason why I'm banging on about this is because the Rif over here, normally all the Rif does is he cuts out what's not halakha, and therefore we're left with a halakhic ruling. But on our topic, he adds some words, which is quite rare. The Rif doesn't normally add, he normally just cuts out all non-halakha. But every once in a while, he adds his own sentence. And in source number 3, he indeed does exactly that. He says like this, Adam bahul al rufu'ato. When somebody is ill, people, you get into a little bit of a panic. V'lachein anu chosheshim sheyagia lidei shchikat samemanim. And therefore, I'm worried that they're going to come to start grinding. So the concern is not, meaning I think that what the Rif is trying to do is, the Rif is explaining why in this particular context we are worried about grinding. Because there are many, like, I don't know, if I drink orange juice on Shabbat and then I run out of orange juice, you don't say, don't drink orange juice on Shabbos because you might run out of orange juice and then you might come and squeeze an orange and you're not allowed to squeeze oranges on Shabbat. We don't say that. If I squeeze my oranges before Shabbat, I can drink orange juice on Shabbat. And even if I finish the orange juice, the rabbis are not worried that I might come to squeeze oranges and therefore forbid drinking orange juice. Do you see the parallel? But here, the rabbis are worried. Why are they worried in medication and they're not worried about orange juice? So the Rif explains. And the Rif's answer is because that when it comes to medication, they get into a panic. And I'm worried that somebody might inadvertently, like without just like crush and make some medications. Therefore, dafka in the area of medication, they say you're not allowed to crush. Joy, clear? That's the Gemara. Is that clear to everybody? Any comments? Any thoughts? No thoughts? One thought that you're all thinking, just too polite to say it, is that nowadays that's not the worry. Nachon? You don't run out of Tylenol and say, oh, bother, we're out of Tylenol, and then run into the garden and then like pick some herbs and then get your mortar and pestle. Nachon? We're not worried about that nowadays. So it's interesting because the whole basis of this prohibition of taking medication seems less, I would say, almost not relevant nowadays, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Good question. Thank you very much, Gedalia. Anyone else have any questions in addition to Gedalia's? Any thoughts on what Gedalia just said? Yes.
So what if I would like to drink a medicine, but because I'm thirsty and I'm not sick?
Oh my gosh, you could not have asked that at a better time. It's like planted. That is the next source. We're going to talk the next source, and we're going to see on the other side very interesting practical ramifications of this. Talking about, let's say, vitamin pills or lavdafka. Let's say my mother tells me that if you've got a cold, you have to have, I don't know, like honey and lemon or something like that. So I've got a sore throat. My mother told me to drink that. Is that a medicine? Like, how do I decide? Is that your question?
Yeah, it's like a lot of questions in one, I guess.
But that's sort of like
Yeah, sure.
Oh, so that hopefully that was your question, that is exactly what the next piece of Gemara is talking about. So I'm just going to have some voice medicine here. Thank you very much. So the Mishnah says like this. Source number 4. Ein ochlin is beyond b'Shabbat. I'm afraid I don't know what is beyond is. But it's a type of food that people only eat because they're not feeling well. You're not allowed to have isbion on Shabbat. Why? Because it's not a food that people who are well eat. However, you are allowed to have yo'ezer, which is another type of food. V'shoter abuv ru'ah, and you can have this abuv ru'ah. Now, why are you allowed to have yo'ezer? And why you're allowed to have abuv ro'eh? The reason why you are allowed to have these foods is because these are foods that people eat even when they're well. It's not, I mean, some people have it because they're ill, but some people have them even when they're feeling well. I wonder whether a modern example of this might be like cough sweets. Like, some people, you've got a sore throat. So there's some people that they don't normally have sweets, but if they've got a sore throat, they might take a mint. They might suck a mint, right? Now, that mint, there's some people who are well that will suck a mint because they like the taste of mint. I, personally, only if I've got a sore throat, I might suck a mint. So that would be permitted. That's not a medication because even people who are well have a mint. It's you're having it because you want to feel, you want to have a better voice. But it's not only people who are ill who have it. But maybe contrast that with, does everyone know what strepsils are? Strepsils?
Yeah.
No one who's well has strepsils. Is that right? It's not like, oh, I love the taste of a strepsil. Is that true? Do you know what that is? You obviously don't. So they're like sweets that you buy in a pharmacy to help you if someone's got a sore throat. It's not a snack.
Like, a cough drop.
Yeah, cough drop.
But it's an European thing too. Strepsils is like Europe-wide.
Okay.
A cough drop. So I wonder whether, I mean, it all depends on what people are like. But if a cough drop is only taken by people with a cough, right? I think, as far as I know, in my little world, no one who's well, sort of, they never offer around. Do you want a mint? Do you want a mint? Do you want a strepsil? Can I offer you a strepsil? Strepsils are like for people who aren't feeling well. So a strepsil might be a problem. That might be medication, but a mint would be okay, even though the same guy might have both of them. But because healthy people also have mints, they don't fall under the category of medication. But only people who've got sore throats will have a cough drop.
Okay.
Is that true in
I
America?
don't know. In America, people like.
Yeah, but America's
the cough
crazy,
drops
so
are
you
kind of
can't.
very like candy.
Yeah, so that's not
I
so
don't know,
good.
It's just very.
Holes?
Like people will Ricola, like
I don't know what you're
I
talking
see
about now.
people eating cough drops when they don't have a cough.
Okay, so forget that. So then that would be good. So you'd be allowed to have it on Shabbos.
Okay, good.
But there's,
American minhag.
huh?
American minhag. You can, we can't.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so we've seen so far quite a strict ruling concerning having medications on Shabbat. That it's very difficult to justify having medication. And we spoke about the difference between orange juice and Tylenol. And we explained that Tylenol is good. Tylenol is bad. Would not be allowed to have that because you got a headache, you get all like confused. But orange juice is fine. Nachon, everybody with me now? Now, Gedalia over here almost asked, but nowadays that's not the case. So the question is, and this is really a very, very important idea, the rabbis established this gezerah, meaning the rabbis put a fence around a halacha. The rabbi said you're not allowed to have medication on Shabbat. They put this fence. You're not allowed to have this medication on Shabbat because of inside that fence is this grinding. Now, what happens if, figuratively, that grinding comes out? What happens to the fence? You understand my question? Meaning that Chazal created this gezerah. The purpose of it is in order to protect Hilchot Shabbat, to prevent people from grinding on Shabbat. Nowadays, even at the time of the Shulchan Aruch, people weren't really grinding their medication. If somebody is ill nowadays, I'm embarrassed to say this, we don't even have a mortar and pestle in our home. So even if we wanted to grind, we couldn't grind. So now you see this fence around an issue, but the issue's gone. So now what happened to the fence? You hear the question? So that's a very interesting halachic situation. And what we will see, can I do a spoiler? The spoiler is you can never get rid of a fence. Meaning once the rabbis have established a gezerah, so the gezerah stands. You're not allowed to have medication on Shabbat. But what we will see is, both in the Shulchan Aruch and in modern poskim, an effort to minimize the fence. So let's say the fence is here, but if we go back to our metaphor of the fence, I hope this works. At the time when there was a genuine concern that people were going to grind, so then the fence was like a 15-foot stone wall. Like no one's going to get anywhere near there. Nowadays, the problem is much smaller. It's most unlikely that anyone's going to grind. but the fence is there. The rabbis made a fence, but we've demoted it from a 15-foot stone wall to like a little garden fence. You follow? That's my analogy to explain what we are about to read in the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef you can't get rid of a gezerah. The rabbis have established a principle, and therefore we work with the principle in a new situation. Is that clear to everyone? So let's look now at the Bet Yosef. Bet Yosef is Rav Yosef Karo, as you will all know. He is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and he is an excellent summary of the halachic process until his time. Now, if you want to understand any halachic topic in depth, you really need to go to him. He's on that shelf right behind Yosef. The librarian here kindly put the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah on the same shelf. Okay, so this is source number 6. I'm going to read and translate. Kol refuah asur lasot b'Shabbat. It is forbidden to take medication on Shabbat. Mitba'er mitoch hadinin שיעבור בסימן זה, וגם ממה שכתב בסימן הקודם, לזה החושש במותניו לא יסוך שמן וחומץ. והד אסרינו לעשות כל רפואה בשבת, פשיטא דלאו בחולה שיש בו סכנה היא. Now, look at what he says. Obviously, this prohibition of taking medication on Shabbat does not apply to somebody who's in danger. With this we started when we spoke about the electric blanket on fire. Any situation where somebody's life is in danger, you without question, you transgress Shabbat. Now it goes even further. Even if there is no danger to life, but there is danger to a limb, even then you transgress Shabbos. שהרי אפילו מלאכות רבנן עושים לו על ידי ישראל וכמו שהתפאר. וחולה שאין בו סכנה כלל על ידי גוי, מי העושים לו צרכיו הלקח על כורחך. צריך לומר, we therefore need to say, דביש לו מיחוש בעלמא, והוא מתחזק והולך כבריא. Now, he has limited, we have limited this prohibition to a very minimal level of illness. He says like this. I'm going to summarize what he said. There are 4 categories of ill people. The first category is somebody whose life is in danger. No question, you're allowed to break Shabbat for someone whose life is in danger. Second category is somebody who has a limb in danger. God forbid they might lose a limb. Likewise, the rabbis already said that the din of pikuach nefesh applies to life or limb. So, somebody whose life is in danger, somebody who, God forbid, might lose a limb, nothing to talk about. That's absolutely permitted. The third category is somebody who is ill. Somebody who is ill, but their life is not in danger. Now, we said that somebody who is ill, but their life is not in danger, so that someone's got a migraine, God forbid. So I've got a migraine today and I'm just lying in bed, I can't cope. But tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, I'll feel fine. So what do you do about the guy with a migraine? So the guy with a migraine, explains the Bet Yosef, we all know that when you have a good reason to transgress a rabbinic prohibition, you're allowed to transgress a rabbinic prohibition to help somebody whose life is not in danger. So he says, even in that situation, since we would have been allowed to ask a non-Jew to break Shabbat on behalf of somebody whose life is not in danger, therefore this rabbinic prohibition, which is on the same level as asking a non-Jew for help, and since I am allowed to ask a non-Jew for help for him, I'm also allowed to give that person medication. So if somebody has got like a migraine, and they need a tablet, like they just need to take 3 Tylenols and then sleep for 3 hours and then they'll be fine, they would be allowed to take that medication on Shabbat. That's category number 3. Category number 3, somebody who's bedridden but not in a life-threatening situation, since the rabbis allow us to ask a non-Jew to transgress Shabbos for them, and that is breaking Isur to Rabbanan. So that fence is the same size as our fence, and since you can knock down the fence and asking a non-Jew, you're also allowed to give them medication. So that's 3 categories. Who's left? Who's left? So what's the 4th category for which you're not allowed to take medication? So the 4th category is michush. Michush is somebody who feels a bit under the weather, but they're able letafked. They're able to function. Now I'm going to give you a terrible, terrible analogy. How can I tell the difference between person number 3 and person number 4? This is the analogy. Are you ready? You are in your lounge. You're in your lounge and you've got a headache. And you're lying on the couch and you're sort of like not really with it. You follow? There's a knock on the door. And there's a girl who comes in and you're quite interested. Maybe she could be the one. Now, what do you do at that moment? If I just feel, I'm just going to go to my room. Then you are category number 3 and you're allowed to take medication on Shabbat. But if when she comes in, oh, that's all right, so I've gone away now, feel a bit better. And then I sit up and I somehow find energy, that's category number 4, that's michush, and that person is not allowed to take medication on Shabbat. Is that clear to everybody? Category number 4, yes.
Isn't it like a little bit subjective? Because what if there's no one to open the door and it is important?
No, there's no, it's just an analogy. Only an analogy. I'm not sure how ill I am, but imagine if she would come in, what would I do? Do you know what I mean?
To the medicine.
What?
You will take a medicine.
No, I'm only using, it's a rubbish example. I remember Shlomo, especially here where, like people come from all different sorts of worlds. There's sort of like, there's a language that everybody understands. That situation is a scenario that maybe you haven't been, but you understand the 2 positions that you might find yourself in. There's some people who, with all the energy and with all the will in the world, I just haven't got the energy in my body to function today. And there are other people, no, if I had to, I would find the energy inside of myself. You follow? And the person that hasn't got the energy inside of them, that is a choleh she'ein bo sakana. Somebody who's ill, but their life is not in danger. They are allowed to take medication on Shabbos. And that 4th one, called a michush, is somebody who, if I really needed to, I would find the energy inside of me. That person would not be allowed to take medication on Shabbat. So what the rabbis have done, as we see from the Beit Yosef, is they've taken this principle of no medication on Shabbat and they've really limited it quite severely to a very specific situation. Is that clear to everybody?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So Shabbat is like, it has to be joyful. And if I feel pain, it seems like I'm not enjoying Shabbat. And am I allowed to take medicine because I wanted to do simcha in Shabbat?
So that's a very, very good question. Because simcha, it's a very, very good question. It's very, very it's complicated because sort of simcha can't be my passport to like go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like I need to be joyful. So then I don't know. I need to use my coffee machine, or I need to like read my Kindle, or I need to listen to music, or it depends. It's a very, very good question. I would add. I want to say 2 things on that. One thing, which is both of them are important. I think 50 years ago, people would be much stricter on that. I need to be joyful business. I don't want to take it to too much of an extreme, but I'm happy you mentioned your question. When we talk about illness, we're not just talking about physical illness, we're also talking about mental illness. And if, God forbid, somebody is prone to depression, God forbid, and there's certain things they need to do on Shabbat. Let's say I need to listen to music, otherwise I'll have a bad time. I'm not going to get involved in giving any halachic rulings. That's really a question that each person would need to ask a halachic authority. But just know that when we speak about pikuach nefesh, saving a life, we're not just talking about a person who is in physical danger. We're also talking about people who are in mental danger, God forbid, of depression. And that's also an important factor in coming to halachic decisions. Very, very recently, a sweet, sweet friend of mine, together with a psychologist, wrote a book of halacha, the first book that I know of that sort of considers mental health halachic issues. So you're not just considering physical health, but sort of thinking about halachic questions related to mental health. So simcha is a very, very big deal. Simcha is important. But for people who are functioning normally, you can't let my desire for simcha sort of become a ticket to allow me to do things that are forbidden. But I'm not talking about, God forbid, if somebody is prone to, somebody needs certain stimulus in order to maintain like a healthy mental state. I'm not talking about that. So it's horrible thing to. I want to tell you one story in this context. It's in a totally also in Hilchot Shabbat, but in a different area that I think is a very, very important story. I have a friend. When I was a student, I had some friends who had a student house in London, and student house, especially boys' student houses, weren't the tidiest places in the world. And I think what these boys did was they sort of, they lived basically in like this almighty mess until every week on Friday afternoon, they would have this crazy, crazy clean. Each boy had a different area of the house they had to clean, Lichvot Shabbat, and they would have like 15 frantic minutes, and this one was hoovering, another one was brushing, and then like 15 minutes later, the flat was sparkling again, and then Shabbat would start, and then it would turn into a tip again until the following Shabbat, and that was the cycle. Anyway, so these boys, it was a Friday night, and they finished cleaning the flat. They ran out to shul, and they were hosting the Friday night meal. When they came home on Friday night, they realized that they had left the vacuum cleaner on when they went to shul. So they wanted to know, are we allowed to turn off the vacuum cleaner? So why should they be allowed to? If you leave a vacuum cleaner on for 25 hours, there's a good chance it might explode. It could cause a fire. It could be, who knows? They're not made to be on for 25 hours. They're made to be on for an hour maybe. So they went to a rabbi, and they asked the rabbi, are they allowed to turn it off? Because it might cause a fire. It's making a loud noise. We want to enjoy Shabbat. I can't enjoy the Shabbat when there's a vacuum cleaner blaring in the corner with all the dust and everything. Are they allowed to turn it off? And the rabbi said something very, very important. He did not allow them to turn it off. And he said, this minute, it's not exploding this minute. What you need to do is you need to have a rota of boys. Like you have to be sensible about it, but somebody needs to be supervising it at all times. If you see that it explodes, and of course then you pour water on it. But this particular minute is just causing a racket in the background. But the factor that it's impacting my Onik Shabbat is not a reason to allow me to turn it off. And if I remember correctly, they left it on, and then different people had rotas, it was all right. The rota till about midnight was all right. But then one boy stayed up from like 12 till 1 to check, 1 till 2, 2 till 3, they had the rota. Then about, 1:32 in the morning, that was just, that was the end of the, the vacuum cleaner sort of just turned, withered off by itself. But the point of the story is that when they went to ask, can we turn it off? So there's no pikuach nefesh this minute, and the fact that it's annoying is not a reason to allow me to turn it off. In terms of the value of Oneg Shabbat would never allow me to transgress Shabbat. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to just finish the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef continues. We come to see we have one category. You follow? Michush ba'alma. When I'm doing okay, then you're not allowed to take. That person is not allowed to take medication. The truth is that's really enough. That's enough from the Shulchan Aruch. From the Bet Yosef. It's source number 3. Source number 6. Sorry. Source number 6, 4 categories. We saw 4 categories in source number 6. The person whose life is in danger, the person who has a limb in danger, the person who is bedridden. All of those people are allowed to take medication on Shabbat. The 4th person who's feeling under the weather is not allowed to take medication on Shabbat. Joy? This halachic analysis that the Bet Yosef presents in source number 6 is translated into law in source number 7 in the Shulchan Aruch. And he says, Mi sheyesh lo michush ba'alma, somebody who is feeling under the weather, v'hu mitchazek v'olech kapari, but he's able to function. He's able to function. He's not bedridden. Asur lasot lo shum refuah. You're not allowed to take medication on Shabbat. Afilu alidei eno yodi. A non-Jew is not allowed to give it to him. Gezeira, it is a rabbinic fence. Mishum shechikat samanim, because you're not allowed to grind medication. You hear that, everybody? So what did he do? What's the Shulchan Aruch done? We had this problem, grinding, and the rabbinic fence around it. The problem of binding disappeared. The problem of binding was there. It's no longer there. They didn't get rid of the fence, but they modified the fence because the danger in the middle got smaller. You follow? You can never get rid of the fence, but you can modify the fence in light of the danger of the melacha that the rabbis built the fence around. You follow? So since the danger went down, so the fence went down too. Does that make sense to everybody? Joy, joy, joy. Okay, now we're going to go to modern halacha. Nowadays, 2 from about 100 years ago, and the third one from, I don't know, about 15 years ago, from a current modern rabbi in America. Okay, look at this. The Ketzot HaShulchan, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. The reason, the prohibition of taking medication, mishum kazeirat shchikat samamin. I'm worried about crushing herbs. Kiltfei bizmanenu. Kiltfei means this is a lighter prohibition nowadays. Why? Nowadays, people don't make medication that way. If you want Tylenol, you don't go to your cupboard, you go to the pharmacy. But Beit HaMerkachat, you go to the pharmacist in the pharmacy. We don't need to concern ourselves that people who make medication may come to grind medication, because a person who takes medication is not going to come to grind. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch was able to limit this gezeira. They limited the gezeira because the danger has been lowered. Likewise, in the Mishnah Berurah is rather the Chavetz Chaim 100 years ago. He says, Michush ba'alma, somebody who's ill. He's quoting from the Shulchan Aruch that we saw. Somebody who's ill is not allowed to take medication. De'im ka'iv le'tuva, if he's in great pain, v'chala kol gufa, and all of his body's in pain, al yidei zeh, or shenafal mishkav, he's bedridden, av she'ein bo sakana, even if you're in danger, even if there's no danger, mutar la'asot b'shvulo refuah she'ein ba melacha, even though there's no danger to his life, you're allowed to give him medication. So, if somebody is in pain in their whole body, they are allowed to take medication on Shabbat. Don't know if that answers what you're asking. Okay, Beseda. That's it. That's from the Mishnah Berurah. Everything clear to everybody? Okay, 2 points in source number 10, and with that we will conclude our discussion. Okay, the first point is from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And he's got a very, very important point here about, there's another factor. We spoke about 4 categories. Nachon? We spoke about somebody whose life is in danger, somebody whose limb is in danger, somebody who's bedridden, and somebody who's, if they had to find the energy they'd be able to survive. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who lived about 30 years ago, did he die? He died maybe about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more. He lived here in Jerusalem in Shaarei Chesed. He has a fifth category of person. And this fifth category of person may be a subset of number 4. So it makes number 4 even smaller. We said, if I can function, I'm not allowed to take medication. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, even if I can function, there's still a subcategory within category number 4, a subcategory within the people who can function, michosh ba'alma, and those people would also be allowed to take medication. Who are they? I'm going to read. He says like this. He rules that there is room to be lenient when there is a concern of preserving human dignity. Kvod habriot. So let's say, for example, somebody has got a severe running nose. Like it's just uncomfortable to be in their presence. Like if I personally don't have this, but people who have terrible allergies, in the summer, hay fever, people can drive you mad. So I'm okay. I could put on a brave head. I'm not bedridden. I just can't stop sneezing. You follow? That person has their condition is compromising their human dignity, being in that state. You follow? And therefore he says, the Chazal, the rabbis, waive rabbinical prohibitions to preserve human dignity. Perhaps this lenient ruling extends to taking allergy medication if the pollen count is quite high, or taking another medication to avoid embarrassment. But of course you would need to ask a rabbi in order to understand on that one. So we have 5 categories. We have category number 1, somebody whose life is in danger, no question. Somebody limb in danger, no question. Somebody who is bedridden, no question. Now, the 4th category now divides into 2 parts. You have somebody who can function if they have to. Meichush ba'alma, they're under the weather, but they could function. But even within the I can function, there are 2 categories. There are people whose human dignity has been compromised by their position, and people whose human dignity has not been compromised by their position. It could be that if somebody's got terrible stomach pains, and basically they're going to spend the whole Shabbat using the bathroom, so that's not mechubad. You follow? It's not a that position compromises my human dignity. So that it could be that even in that situation, I would be allowed to have medication in a situation where I can function, but my ailment compromises my dignity. You follow? Got a bit of a headache, that's not so bad. Got a bit of sore throat, I can get by. But whatever it is, an allergy or some that would compromise my human dignity, that might be a problem. Does that make sense to everybody? That's point number 1. His second point, and the final point, is something very interesting. I had no idea about this. I have a brother who's a pharmacist, and I have a daughter who's almost a nurse. I'm going to ask them about this. Aspirin. Apparently, aspirin is a medication that people take every day. Some people take it as a way to prevent heart attacks. Now, if aspirin is something that people take every day, then it's possible that would be called ma'achal bri'im. He's quoting Rav Soloveitchik, that some people say you are allowed to take aspirin on Shabbat, because some people take it not because I'm ill, but I take aspirin in order to prevent something happening in the future. Perhaps a little bit like taking vitamin pills or like eating a healthy lifestyle. I'm taking aspirin not to cure anything, but I'm taking aspirin to prevent something. If I'm taking it to prevent something, then that would be considered ma'achal bri'im. That even people who are well, if it's a medication, that even people who are well take that medication, I would then be allowed to take that medication because it's not exclusively for people who are ill. That's from Rav Soloveitchik. I have to say, I personally had not heard of that. And it's not something we do at home. Just because I'd never heard of it, I have to discuss it with my wife and see what she thinks. But no, it's an interesting perspective. That's about aspirin. There's one final point. I thought I finished, but it turns out I haven't. One final point, and that is, if somebody's taking antibiotics for a week, or somebody has medication every day, of course, even though I'm well today, I would continue the course of medication. That would be category number 3. You know, even though I can function like everybody else, but it's completing a course that were I not to be having that course now, I would be in, one of the other categories. It's almost an extension of pikuach nefesh. Anybody who needs to take medication every single day is obviously, their doctors have decided healthy, somebody is 100% healthy, they don't take medication every day. So the fact that I'm taking medication every day is part of, saving a life in the long term, and therefore I'd be allowed to complete a course of treatment. I'd also be allowed to take medication on Shabbat. If you have 10 days of antibiotics and one of the days is a Shabbat, then of course I'd be allowed to take it. An extension really of pikuach nefesh. Does that make sense to everybody? Joy, happiness, questions, comments? Yes.
Homeopathy?
Huh?
Homeopathy?
Oh, that's a good question. Good question. There, it might depend if it's ma'achal bri'im. What the medication is. Sometimes homeopathic medicine is just like training towards a healthier diet. Like rather than taking medicine, I'm going to change your diet. Homeopathic medicine might be less of a problem because it could be ma'achal bri'im. This is stuff that people have, and therefore it's ma'achal bri'im, and therefore it will be less of a problem. That makes sense to you?
Yeah.
Medication from a pharmacist is a bigger problem, but homeopathic medication is often a...
I think it depends on what exactly we're talking about, because if for whichever reason this preparing this homeopathic mixture, you name it, entails grinding or whatsoever, so we're calling back to the first thing.
Involves what?
Grinding something.
Oh, then it'll be a problem. Oh, wow, that would be really exciting. Yeah, if it's grinding, then that could be a real problem. That would be nice. Oh, that's amazing. Then we could go back to the original rabbinic prohibition. Basically, I don't know much about homeopathic medicine. That's the truth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei nefashot rabot u'chesonan al kol ma shebarata lachot ve'nefesh kol chai baruch ha'olamim. Yes. Were you gonna any more comments? Maybe we'll turn for you at home. You're welcome to send questions in the comments. But I think we'll pause here. Do you mind turning it off? Is that okay? Thank you so much.